afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regular council meeting for July 19th. And with that, I will call the meeting to order. If I could get a mover and a seconder, the following items have been added to the agenda. Item 5.4, which is the single source consulting services, IUWS support CS 22-139. Item 6.2, David Galbraith deputation. Item 8.1, June 21st, 2021, council meeting minutes was amended to note the open and closed minutes. Item 11.2.2, presentation. 11.5.2, staff report CS 22-121 regarding the 2023 budget timetable and preliminary budget projection. Agenda item 12.16, bylaw 2022-64, being a bylaw to approve the submission of an application to Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corporation, OILC, for the long-term financing of certain capital works of the Corporation of Norfolk County. The following items have been updated and replaced due to clerical errors. That's bylaw 18-Z-2022. and bylaw 6-OP-2022. Initially, Councillor Van Passen, I understand that you had put a request in that Councillor Martin's motion on green bins be considered before the staff reports. I've just learned that Councillor Martin may not be able to join us at all today, potentially showing up late, but she wasn't, I guess, sure at this point in time. And with that, she requested that her motion actually be removed from today's agenda. So that settles that. Are there any other changes to the agenda? And then if I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? That's carried. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we don't have any early closed items today, so we'll move on to the consent items. Does anyone wish to pull any of the consent items for further discussion? Okay, in that case, we have item 5.1, staff report CS 22-130. That's the capital status report from May 31st, 2022. Budget amendment. 5.2, staff report CD 22-067. A zoning bylaw amendment application said NPL 2022099 in regards to 182 Talbot Street North. 5.3, staff report CD 22-070, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for St. Ladislas Cemetery. And 5.4, staff report CS 22-139, single source consulting services for the IUWS support. Could I have a motion, please, to approve consent items 5.1 to 5.4 as presented? Councillor Huffman, seconded by Councillor Van Passen. All those in favor? That's carried. We have two registered deputations for today's meeting. They are in relation to the planning reports being considered during the staff report section. The agents for the files are in attendance to answer questions during the staff report, and no formal deputation will be provided at this time. So 6.1 is Douglas Stewart regarding agenda item 11.2.1. Again, the agent will be on the line to answer questions regarding the staff report as we come to it in the agenda. And 6.2, David Galbraith regarding agenda item 11.2.2. Again, will be on the call, on the line rather, to answer questions at the time of the staff report. Moving on to communications, we have 5 items of communications today. Does any committee member wish to pull an item of communication? Councillor Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to pull item 7.4, the Heritage and Culture Year-End Report, for a brief discussion.
Okay, are there any other items? With that, Councillor Michelle, why don't you address your concerns with 7.4 at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't in any way have a concern about the report. I just wanted to congratulate the staff of the Heritage and Culture Department for the tremendous efforts that they have put forward over the past couple of years with the pandemic. It has been very difficult on the services that they provide, particularly with our museums being closed for a fair length of time. So I want to congratulate all the staff for their tremendous work and efforts. And in particular, just to further note that one of our staff this past May, Josh Clark, our archivist at the County Archives, was recognized provincially as the Emerging Leader Award by the Archives Association of Ontario. So I just want to formally congratulate Josh on that achievement. And again, congratulations to all of the Heritage and Culture staff for their work in the past year. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Michelle, for your comments. Any other comments from councillors, questions for staff? In that case, if I could have a motion to receive communication items 7.1 to 7.5 as information. Councillor Vanden Riechse, seconded by Councillor Michelle. All those in favor? That's carried. Moving on to the approval of minutes, that's item 8. We have the following regular minutes before us today. 8.1, the council meeting minutes from June 21st, 2022, open and closed. Are there any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, if I could have a motion to approve both sets of minutes as presented. Councillor Rabbit, seconded by Councillor Van Passen. All those in favor? That is carried. Reports of Committee of the Whole, item 9. We have 2 reports of committees under this section of the agenda. Does any councillor wish to pull or discuss any items from the committee minutes? That would be 9.1, the Public Hearing Committee minutes from July 5th, 2022, and 9.2, the Council and Committee minutes from July 12th, 2022. Okay, are there, Councillor Columbus, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Mayor. The hearing committee, item 4.4, page 139 of the agenda package, it continues to recognize 204 Elizabeth Street, Turkey Point. I think Councilman Passon raised that. It should actually be Walsh, Village of Walsh.
Okay, the clerk has noted the correction. Thank you. Anything further? Okay, if there are no other errors or omissions, then if I could have a motion to approve the Public Hearing Committee minutes and the Council and Committee meeting minutes. Councillor Vanden Riechse, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favor? That's carried. Moving on to the reports of advisory committees, that's item 10. We have 6 reports of committees under this section of the agenda today. 10.1 is the Recreation Advisory Committee minutes from June 16th, 2022. Does any councillor wish to discuss any items from June 16th? 10.2 is the Community Policing Committee minutes, June 28th, 2022. Again, does any councillor wish to discuss any items? 10.3, the Heritage and Culture Advisory Committee meeting minutes from March 9th. Okay, seeing none. 10.4, the Heritage and Culture Advisory Committee meeting minutes from December the 8th. 10.5, the Norfolk Heritage Committee minutes, April 25th, 2022. And 10.6, the Norfolk Heritage Committee minutes from February 28th, 2022. Anything? Councillor Columbus? No, okay, sorry, your microphone was on and
Oh, sorry.
I had a look, so I thought maybe. In that case, if I could have a mover and a seconder to receive the following reports of committee for information. Councillor Michelle, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Huffman. All those in favor? That is carried. Staff reports now. That's item number 11. We're going to begin today with 11.2.1. That's staff report CD 22-069 regarding the addendum to official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for 511 Nelson Street West in Port Dover. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you, through the mayor, and good afternoon. So this item involves an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment about the addition of what now would be 3 new tourist cabins as accessory to the residential use on the subject property in Port Dover. There's 5 existing tourist cabins or dwellings on the site. This matter was referred to staff from the June council meeting to follow up on several items and some further review. Those items are outlined in the report, and hopefully, given some further changes that we've made, we haven't complicated more, but here's a brief summary. Over the past 5 years, there's been a number of bylaw or OPP complaints that we found on record, but in the end, almost no violations were found at the end of the day, other than there was a minor property standard item and a mediated solution to a dispute. So from our perspective, there's nothing too significant that would impact this land use decision. Previously in June, we had talked about that an operational management plan would be created to help manage any potential operations for the site into the future. In June at the council meeting, the mayor asked about long-term tenant and consideration of allowing for longer-term rental versus the more short-term rental or tourist cabins, which as being defined in the bylaw are more aimed at the traveling public. And since then, the applicant has now confirmed, in fact, there is a long-term tenant, happens to be in a building that is non-conforming and where it kind of straddles the hazard land and the residential zoning line. So that can stay that way. They can keep operating currently in that fashion. But the idea of legalizing one dwelling unit within the residential zone portion of the property is a good one. And would further provide one other option for the rental use of this site. So by allowing one of the buildings to legally be a dwelling unit, that also could be a preferred option for the zoning long-term. And as such, the recommended bylaw has been revised as part of this report that's before you to allow one dwelling unit on the residential portion of the site. That could allow the owner to have the flexibility to use it for a rental not associated with the traveling public or tourists, but a long-term rental to give it a little bit of balance for our housing needs. So to summarize, I'm going to briefly share screen to show the updated, revised concept map for the property. It's split zoned. There's hazard land to the south and residential zone to the north. In the hazard land zoning, there's one house and two rentals that are non-conforming. They can continue as is. They can keep operating that way, you know, fixing walls, whatever it might be. Any major changes, like doing an addition, would need to go through committee of adjustment. In the residential zoning of the portion of the property on the north side, there could be the permissions in this proposed zoning for one dwelling. There's one tourist cabin in the existing structure, and they could build up to 3 new ones, along with a minimum amount of separation between the new cabins. So that would be a total of 8 on the property. The applicants provided a letter confirming they're okay with the one reduced tourist cabin, new tourist cabin. We've also had a follow-up meeting on the revised zoning, and I believe the agent Douglas Stewart is available to assist me in case there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Questions from council? Councilor Banner-Rishi, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. This was quite a sensitive matter with the neighborhood there. Has some of that been resolved then with the changes that have been made?
Through the mayor, I would identify that we had quite a bit of discussion in June at the council meeting about this and in the June report. Previously, this item, to be honest, has been going on for about a year now, so we do need to bring some conclusion. Over a year ago, there was a follow-up meeting with the surrounding residents and the landowner and their representatives in the county. I believe there is a number of outstanding issues. From the staff perspective, we can address some of them through the land use, and that's why we're proposing one less tourist cabin, just for a little bit less intensity and use of the site and some spacing. And the operational management plan is, from our view, a key point. And the other part of this is that we would confirm that site plan would be required. So therefore, we can look at things like landscaping and lighting and the parking and the driveway and the garbage, etc. Does that resolve all of the neighbors' real or perceived issues? We did not have anyone, I believe, write in from the council meeting. The applicant may be able to address that a little better if they've taken some other steps to have some conversations to get to this concluding point. And at this point in time, we're ready to move ahead with the application.
Thank you.
Further questions from council? I still have a handful, actually. So, in terms of the zoning, I really should have asked this before, and it didn't cross my mind until recently. As we look to urban, what is the tax assessment? I mean, MPAC assesses based on use, regardless of what the zoning on a property is. So at what point does this trigger? I mean, if somebody was to build a hotel with this many units, they would be assessed at a commercial rate. Now that there's this many units, is this property still being assessed as residential?
To the mayor, that is something that we did flag with finance. And so in the June report, there are some finance services comments about this. There was some degree of certainty that this improvement and change would likely drive an increased assessed value. However, it was uncertain as to what MPAC would reassess the lands as, whether or not it would be more of a hotel-like commercial use or not. So at this point in time, I think we're uncertain as to exactly what the assessment would be.
Well, it's something that makes a significant difference when we look at the amount of dollars. I mean, granted that there haven't been, I can't remember what the words were that you used here. My apologies. Staff note that the nature of the incidents does not result in many violations. And then you used the words today, you said almost no violations. Like, I'm not really sure what that means. When we look at how much each bylaw call costs the taxpayers, and if this is being continued to be assessed at a residential rate, at what point does, having a property like this start to cost the taxpayers money as opposed to, generating an increased assessment? But just, I don't know. I'm a little bit, I feel that this is something that one should know the answer to, as to whether or not this would look to be a commercial assessment now based on a significant number of increased units. And, when we look at the note from staff did not result in many violations, I think that any violations are a concern, because what I don't want to see is that we get to a point because of a couple bad properties where staff then come and say, which I know it's been talked about, well, we want to regulate all Airbnbs in the county because other municipalities are doing it, and we want to add a layer of bureaucracy because there's a couple bad apples. I'd rather have some sort of clause in here to begin with that the county is protected, that if there continue to be not many, but some violations, that we're not looking to regulate everyone because of this scenario.
Yeah, to the mayor, a couple points on that. So there were, at least 9 bylaw enforcement complaints. That means that at least in 9 occurrences, there was some bylaw enforcement staff that had to attend the property and do some kind of follow-up or paperwork. I believe there was only 1 violation found out of those 9 that required the property standards order. There's typically
Brandon, if I can interrupt, if I
Sure.
can interrupt you, sorry. So, the property violation standard, I'm not really concerned about that. I'm more concerned with, were these types of violations, were they noise violations? Were they based on the things that the neighbors are saying occurred, whether that's fireworks or parties, late night, weeknights, that kind of things? Were those the types of violations? But just telling us it didn't result in many violations doesn't really get to the heart of what the concern is.
To the mayor, my understanding from the list of enforcement complaints, they did involve noise, potential heavy equipment, and zoning permissions of the property or other property standards about the buildings themselves. I believe the only one that was found to be in violation was the property standard and not necessarily the noise. A few other items, typically the assessment and the valuation of the assessment typically is not a factor when really looking at a land use decision, but it might be a practical thing for the municipality when making a decision. And some of the other aspects too, of course, is that having the tourist cabins and the new development would come with some revenues and some other economic benefits from the tourism, the overnight accommodations, etc. But understand the point.
Okay, I just want to drill down that a little more. It's not a factor when making a land use decision. So if somebody wanted to turn their house into a restaurant, they could keep the residential zoning then, and that wouldn't be a factor in making that decision. I mean,
To the mayor,
the idea behind this is that we're in a residential neighborhood with a couple of units with neighbors that have expressed concerns. Generally speaking, I would say that bylaw, when they're going in for noise complaints and so on, not often are charges actually laid. They usually tell people to turn down the music or whatever, and they go on their merry way. So the fact that there haven't been charges laid doesn't mean that the occurrence didn't actually happen. So when we look at a residential neighborhood and now we're looking at increasing, the number of cabins, at a certain point, when does those number of cabins on one single property actually become closer to that of a hotel type operation than it does, a special provision with residential? And that's where I think that it does affect a land use decision, because we're going from residential to a commercial operation. And when the taxpayers are having to pay for bylaw to go out there 9 times over the last period of time, that certainly would help a lot if we were receiving commercial tax revenue off of the property as opposed to a residential tax revenue.
to the mayor, if I may help clarify partly what I meant by the statement is whether or not the assessed value of a property may be, say, $3,000 and a decision might make it $4,000 or $5,000. That's not necessarily the significant component of making, I guess, a planning professional opinion on the land use. It's whether it's compatible and appropriate. In terms of where the buffer and boundary is between something becoming a hotel or not, that is something that, although that wasn't necessarily a follow-up from the June referral, it is something that through the senior planner and myself, we did have a number of discussions, and we would say this one's probably on the border of that. The key of what we were looking at is tying these tourist cabins as accessory to the residential, and they are individual units. And to be honest, it is on kind of the border of whether or not it could be a hotel or not. It doesn't seem necessarily comparable to other hotels, but at this point in time, we were recommending to take the accessory tourist cabin approach and try and keep it a little bit more of the residential character of the area.
Well, the decision as to make it residential or commercial doesn't change the character of the area, the plan, the site plan, everything is exactly the same, but it certainly makes an impact to the taxpayers on how that's assessed. Councilor Van Passen, I see you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. More comment. I think you're about 25, 30 years too late for this discussion. That place had that use, that whole block had that use 25, 30 years ago. There used to be a store next door. There used to be more rental accommodations. Everything from there to the bend in the road on Nelson were all rental things 40 and 50 years ago, and it was agriculture on the north side of the road. The shift has been that it's now becoming residential that is pushing out the commercial use that's always been there. So, all this one is doing is reverting to what it's always been. So, maybe the planners 25 years ago, 30 years ago weren't thinking far enough ahead. There's nothing new going to happen on this property that hasn't been going on there for at least 50 years. They're adding 3 more of the same use that they've always had at that time. So I think Councilor Shelley probably remembers going to the Bonneview Lodge and buying a candy, right? But the little store next door, the more all the cabins from there, the Kiwanis Club had their whole park at the bend there by the flashing light. The use in Dover has changed over the years, and I think we're bringing some of it back because there is definitely a need for that short-term and longer-term accommodations. And again, I still think this is a good project, and no, you're not going to ever keep everybody happy. But
Is there a question? It was more on the, we haven't got into the debate portion. again, the concern is just more on the decision of the land use from the planning department. We are adding something. It is fundamentally changing the property. Even Brandon has acknowledged that they could have gone the other direction with the commercial piece. So it has changed from however many years ago. That's why we're here today, to discuss the change to the property.
MPAC makes those decisions. We don't, and I'm sure that staff can have some input and help MPAC get the right one, and I'm sure they will.
MPAC does a tax assessment based on the use, but we also have a change to a property, which sometimes necessitates a zoning change, which is also what we're discussing. Any further questions from council? Okay, if I could have a mover, either mover and a seconder for the staff recommendation or proposing an alternative. Councillor Van Passen, staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? That's carried. Moving on to the next item is 11.2.2 staff report CD 22-071. That's a zoning bylaw amendment and vacant land condominium application for the Rob Lake Way. Brandon, I believe you're doing this report as well.
Yes, thank you again. So this afternoon before us, we have an amendment for Rob Lake Way. It's a vacant land condominium and zoning amendment. It's immediately west and south of the Norview Lodge. It's about a 3.85 hectare site, currently designated for a wide range of residential uses. The lands are currently zoned right now for residential and allow for townhouses. The primary increase in the zoning is at the back part of the site, which is proposed for a mid-rise apartment. The proposed zoning provisions are to indicate that the whole of the lands would be one lot for the purposes of certain zoning provisions. There's a reduction in some of the front yard landscaping, and there's a proposed reduction just now for the residential apartment that instead of 1.5 spaces per unit, 1 space per unit would be required at minimum, plus the visitor parking spaces. So this is a vacant land condominium. It's similar to a subdivision, but instead of lots or blocks, they're units, which can be sold or leased. The roads, the open space areas, and then in this case, the visitor parking and the garden area are part of the common element. And those are to be private, maintained by the condominium and not the municipality. So it's advantageous to do this form of development for smaller, I'd say awkward shaped parcels of land, especially if there's intensification involved. It helps as a benefit for developing the site with the reduced roads, along with a benefit to the municipalities. We don't have to maintain the roads or the common elements. So what's proposed are 62 townhouses and an apartment block or unit, which currently is roughly estimated to be about a 48 unit apartment. Given the length of the cul-de-sac and the emergency access is required, that would be near the apartment block, across the apartment block to the ring road, and that would be for fire or emergency purposes only. There was a public hearing last year, and there was a number of concerns and issues that were raised at the time. Since that time, I understand there's been meetings with Norview staff, the applicant, and that's resulted in some of the townhouse blocks and units being rearranged or reoriented so that they no longer have the backyards facing Norview or the ring road, but instead they're going to be flanking or the side of it, and there's going to be a privacy fence installed along the ring road with enhanced landscaping that the developer would be responsible for. So there's a number of conditions that are recommended as part of this application, similar to a plan of subdivision. They're attached to the report. One of the next steps would be to move forward with those conditions in the site plan. The applicant has indicated that the development likely would be done in phases, with the townhouses in phase 1 and the apartment building in phase 2. They've also indicated that this development is targeting net zero energy, which is quite exciting. And at this point in time, the applications meet the official plan consistent with the provincial policy statement and are recommended for approval. And I believe that the agent is on the line in case there are any questions, as our esteemed county planner is not available this week. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandon. Questions from council? Councilor Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I know at the original meeting, Councillor Van Passen brought up the idea of running a gravel driveway in behind the garage just to allow the construction equipment to get in to avoid having the heavy trucks run down Rob Lake Way and rip up the road. Wonder if that discussion did take place.
Through the mayor, we can have maybe the applicant confirm later on, but I believe that there were some discussions about that, and what's been agreed to is that a condition of this development would be a construction management plan for all phases, which could include that gravel access to kind of do a bit of a bypass so we don't have to disrupt most of the ring road.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Councilor Clumps, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Brandon, in the past, councils terms, there have been requests for waste pickup in some of these condo developments. And in this particular one, is the plan to have the condo owners pay for their own waste management?
Through the mayor, I did ask that question, and my understanding is that it may be possible for municipal waste pickup. However, if the development can't meet all of the requirements and the design, then it would be a private pickup responsibility. And this, I understand the snow clearing also would be private though.
Right. And overhead street lighting and that would all be the part of the condo owners then too?
Through the mayor, that's correct. So any of the lighting, anything to do with that internal road, any of the landscaping, even the visitor parking, there's some open space areas as well. I think a community garden, that would all be part of the private condominium and their responsibility to maintain.
Thank you.
I guess I have a couple concerns. I have a concern on the parking. I just can't quite wrap my head around this. So sometimes I wonder why we even have bylaws. You know, we debate sometimes for infill projects about somebody being short one parking space for a small unit, which is not really the problem. And then we have a big development like this, and just to make it clear, the developer, I support the project. I have concerns about its proximity to Norview and so on, but I certainly support the project. But what I don't like, have you ever heard of the saying, robbing Peter to pay Paul? So when you look at the math that's been done on the parking spaces, I find it kind of hilarious that we went from a 1.5 requirement for the parking spaces for the apartments, 1.5 per unit. And then the original proposal was 1.2. And then now council said, hey, we want visitor parking spaces. So we scrolled that number above down to 1 per unit, which I think is a pretty rare thing where there's only 1 parking space over 48 units. We're assuming then that nobody in 48 units has 2 cars. That's impossible. I could buy it for a couple unit, even a 6-unit building, that may be possible. But over 48 units, that not one of those units is a 2-car family that's in there, that just doesn't even make sense to me. And so we went from council said we want visitor parking, which none was being initially provided. And so now we're saying, okay, we'll give you all the visitor parking, but the parking that we promised you for the units themselves that were required, we're going to sneakily reduce that even further. So can you tell me just, Brandon, what the actual reduction is from the required per our bylaws, what the total parking reduction is on this project?
To the mayor, it would be a reduction from 1.5 spaces per apartment unit
On a
to
percentage
1
basis.
space.
On a percentage basis.
Well, there's about a third less.
Yeah, so we're a third 33.3% reduction on parking spaces, and we just robbed one line to make the other line, the visitor parking space, look good. So when I look at the site plan and I see, you know, open space that's benefiting the developer, that's obviously part of their marketing to offer this open space. When I look at the fact that, you know, one housing unit could be removed and they would be able to easily comply with our zoning bylaw, why are we offering in this particular case when it's very easy to comply with the regulation? Like, what's the point of having a zoning bylaw and requirements if in a situation where it's very easy to comply, just taking a quick look at the site plan, the developer's making more money, which is why we're doing this. But at the end of the day, we have a parking problem then that we have to face, especially in proximity to Norview. I don't get it. And I also don't like that it's taking the 1.2 and reducing it to 1 to make the visitor parking look good. I just feel like that's trying to pull the wool over council's eyes, and that just doesn't sit well with me.
To the mayor, if I may provide a few points. This definitely was one of the remaining issues, I would say, with this proposal before we moved forward to the council meeting. Mohammed and I had some good discussion about this very matter, and we've had some back and forth with the applicant, who I think would prefer to address this matter as well. In looking at it, there's a couple considerations. One, we did look at, could they achieve a higher rate, you know, at least a minimum of 1.25 spaces per apartment unit, to give that potential
Brandon,
for a second.
The minimum is 1.5 on our bylaw, not 1.25, correct?
Yep, we looked at options between 1 space and 1.5 spaces. We looked at the benefits or the consequences, the issues that might happen if there was less than 1.5 spaces. It is not on a public street, so in terms of any possible overflow, it wouldn't necessarily have impacts on the public street, and we presume that no parking would be allowed on the ring road that people would go across or through a fence. We also are aware of the target for the sustainability for the development, and having reduced parking and less reliance on the vehicle is part of the entire vision for the development and the property and the sustainability. The impact that the parking could have on the development, I think we'll let the applicant speak to that. We were at a point where in this context at this place is 1 space per unit minimum enough. And although there was some debate about that, we believe that that could work. The applicant, especially through the condo of this, would have the control over who they would sell or lease the units to as to the number of vehicle spaces that would be available. I'd suggest the applicant may be best to further provide some response to this topic, because it is something we've been in communication with them recently about.
So is there a solid fence that's running around this property between this and in Norview?
To the mayor, I believe what's proposed is a solid privacy fence with some enhanced landscaping that would be between that and the ring road.
So somebody, again, I guess I'm going to put this question to you then. I've mentioned it before. It is your belief that with 48 units, that not one person in 48 units is going to have a 2-car family?
To the mayor, we were pushing some extra spaces to see if there could be some more. And in the end, we were okay with that 1 space could work. And it's to the condominium and the applicant to make that arrangement, that they would only have 1 space, or if they have a visitor, they would be parking in the visitor spaces.
This is a big development. It's a big development with green space that's being provided, with space that either 1 unit could be removed and it could meet those parking requirements, or part of the open space that's being used in their marketing could also be removed to meet those parking requirements. I see a really great parking lot over at Norview that's not monitored and will somehow become overnight parking for people that can't get a parking spot over on their road next door. So I guess I'd like to hear from the applicant agent as to why, they would be asking for relief when it's actually not necessary.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm Dave Galbraith here on behalf of the applicant. So parking is one thing that we did look at as part of this development. We prepared there was a parking justification study prepared for the development with the understanding that it will be rental tenure and that the target market for this will be more retirement / downsizers. And then again, with it being a rental building, there would be an understanding up front as part of a lease arrangement that you would have the availability of one parking space, and then there would be the shared visitor parking spaces as well. So generally speaking, the parking rates that are required for more seniors-oriented housing are considerably lower than market rate housing. And so that's what we have relied upon here. The notion of removing one townhouse unit to provide additional parking, I do note that those units are about 8 meters wide. And so it's not as simple as that would provide the additional space for the parking. Parking spaces are about 6 meters wide. So realistically, we might be able to add a couple more spaces by doing so. But again, we feel that the rate is appropriate with it being a rental seniors-oriented development. And one thing that we are investigating is the potential for underground parking. Obviously, it can be cost prohibitive. So these would be minimum rates, but if we are able to provide underground parking, the applicant's looking to do so. And then finally, with regards to the open space, it's not open space in the like a park. It's open space. We're using that term to protect the natural heritage features that are there. There is a river that runs south of the property, and this is actually an environmental buffer. So it's proposed to be permanently protected, but not really an amenity for the development. It's a beautiful thing to have backing onto woodlot, but the opportunity to remove it's not technically supported in this case. So we're looking to protect it here.
Okay, so you can't remove the open space, and one unit is not enough to comply, but a couple of units at the end would certainly be enough to comply, or at least get you somewhat have, at least a few units that might have 2 cars per unit. And I just think yes, we want to encourage people to, to be more green, but let's face it, we're a rural community. We don't really, we have some public transit. It's not really a viable way of getting around Norfolk County or linking into other areas. So this idea that, we're like the city where people are going to take the subway and only have one car. I think this council right now, I can't even tell you how many calls and emails I've had to field with, we have a development in Port Dover that has 1 parking space per unit. And now that there's paid parking in Port Dover, everybody is frustrated of where they put their second car because there's nowhere to put their second vehicle. So this idea that with 48 units there, that there is not going to be one of those units that has 2 cars, it is so highly unlikely. I can't even begin to articulate it. And again, I appreciate that as a developer, you want to push the envelope as much as you can to maximize your profit, but this council also has to consider other concerns, and we have a bylaw for a reason. So on a massive development like this, I think it's, 46 apartments and you are able to comply with the restrictions, I think is pretty fair, to be honest, or at least get it closer to what it should be. Councillor Huffman.
Could I respond?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, I think again, there's broader goals here, and I would say as a response, the client is definitely in the business of selling homes and interested in making profit, but this is a unique development. Net zero developments and communities of this scale are very rare at this point. They're becoming more popular or more common, but it is unique in that sense. But with regards to the parking specifically, I think if it would assist council, we could amend the proposed rate for apartments to 1.1 for the apartment building, plus the same 0.3 visitor parking, which would build in, if you had 50 units for instance, that would give the availability of 2 spaces to 10% of the units, so five of the units there. But again, we are fairly constrained on the site and trying to create a great net zero project here.
I just want to confirm. So that was an additional, just like that, we've got an additional 5 parking spaces plus keeping the visitor parking spaces the same.
That is correct.
Well, if we got 5, then surely we can get 10. So I would be happy to support it with 10. And, but I will put it over to council, but I would even be happy to pass the chair to move that. Oh, Councillor Huffman, sorry, you had the question.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to the applicant. I guess my concern is you mentioned something about underground parking, which kind of seems like a last minute addition. Would that not have to be something that would be part of the planning application already?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So at this point, what the application is proposing to do is to create the block for the apartment development. The design of the apartment would be subject to full municipal review through a future site plan application. So at that time, we would confirm the viability of underground parking on the site, which would include a geotechnical investigation. We'd obviously have to look at the water table here and then cost as well. So something that would be subject to a county approval through the site plan process, but not a last minute addition. It's something that we would take away and work through the site plan process.
Do you really expect us to believe that we're debating 10 parking spaces, that you guys are actually going to consider an underground parking when we can't get an additional, the spaces to just meet that requirement, that you're going to absorb that kind of cost?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the parking that we have proposed right now in our site plan is basically full build out of that block to get to the parking ratio that we have provided. So in order to actually provide the additional spaces, it would necessitate either removing apartment units to conform to that standard or the introduction of an underground garage.
Councillor Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Galbraith, this is proposed to be a net zero development. How big a part of that net zero are these reduced parking spaces?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So net zero, the buildings themselves are proposed to be net zero in terms of energy consumption versus production. There will be solar integrated onto the site. So even in our preliminary designs for the apartment building that will be subject to site plan approval, that's a component of it. But net zero as a philosophy is about creating sustainable developments. And parking is a huge component of that, as Mr. Sloan has alluded. Providing the right amount of parking for the uses that you're proposing is critical, right? Because it does, a person would be buying into this lifestyle of a net zero community here. And part of that would be, using trails, public transit, which I understand is limited in this area. But again, that's the type of community that is trying to be fostered here.
Madam Mayor, if I can just ask. So, Mr. Galbraith, so it sounds like you're suggesting that we've got solar panels and we've got reduced parking spaces, and that this the emphasis on the tenancy of this building will be its environmental sustainability. Is that the way that this development will be marketed to the public?
Yes, it will be. Yes.
Go ahead, Councillor Vanden Rishi.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I am not able to support this unless we can get to the extra 20%, which would be approximately the 10 units. It is not feasible in a rural setting that which we are. I understand your net zero, the energy versus production. I understand that. But at the end of the day, people have to get places, even if it is a retirement couple. One goes in one direction, one goes in another. I can't get to swimming downtown if my husband's got the car and he's gone to the market. So at the end of the day, I think it's more feasible to see that we get as close to the 1.5 or the extra 20% anyway. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to support this. And it's unfortunate because we do need residential spaces. Thank you.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I go to the chart in page 206 of our agenda, where it lays out the provisions, part 2 is the apartment. It's required 1.5 spaces per unit, and we're debating whether you want 10 extra spaces. And if we put the proposed in at 1.25, that'll get you 12 extra spaces, or they will reduce the number of units and still have that 1.25 rate. If we amended the staff recommendation to that, would that satisfy the concerns that you have?
So I still think it should have been 1.5 because I still think the developer is making a significant amount of money off the project, and I'm not interested in headaches when there is the ability on such, again, in a smaller area where you have constraints. I can appreciate that. On a project of this size, I don't see why there was a need. But however, with the 1.25, I can get my head around that and support it. But I can't get my head around going from 1.2 with no visitor and then jimmying that number up to now provide visitors and going to 1. That's a robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario. I just don't like having the wool pulled over me, and I think that we can go with a 1.25, and I would support that as well, plus the 16 visitor.
Ask Brandon, can those be adjusted in the bylaws, and that we could approve it with that slight change to the staff recommendation?
Through the mayor, I would suggest that that would involve 2 changes if there was a motion. So the first would be to the first recommendation of reports CD 2271 to add the words, provided that the apartment parking rate is amended to be 1.25, I believe, spaces per unit. And then subsequently, if that recommendation is approved, then through the clerk, I would ask that bylaw 24-Z-22, which is on the agenda later, that clause 2D A triple I be updated to change 1.0 to 1.25, if that's the council decision.
Are you moving that, Councillor Van
If I could
Passen?
move that
Fantastic.
motion, Madam Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Vanden Rishi. Any further debate on the matter? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Okay, moving on to Councillor Martin, welcome. We did pull your motion from the agenda. Are we looking to? I'm not sure if that's possible at this point or not, or if we will just hear it at the next council meeting.
Through the mayor, if council wants to add it back, it would require a 2/3 majority.
Councillor Van Passen had put a request in at the beginning of the meeting. He has to leave today to have it heard at the beginning. Then we removed that request as a result of the motion being pulled. So I will leave that to Councillor Van Passen at this point, given.
I don't mind putting it back in as long as we can discuss it and complete the discussion before 4 p.m.
Okay, so in that case, it's the rest of council, or we could hear it as the next item unless there's a concern from staff. All right, so Mover and a seconder then, Councillor Martin, I'll let you move that, and second by Councillor Columbus. All those in favor? And that's carried. Councillor Martin, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Thank you, Council. As you recall, last week we had a deputation from a community group that was interested in partnering with Norfolk County, using some staff resources to develop a pilot project whereby they can lean on staff to gather information for said pilot project. There is no financial contribution outside of just the staff resources and time. And the information would come back to council as we do have to investigate a green bin pilot project, a green bin green wastes in the near future by 2024. So I plan to support this. I know that staff have already been working with the group, and I would leave it up to our staff to afford them the appropriate amount of time based on our staff schedule. I don't believe that they need to set a hard and fast meeting schedule. They have questions and concerns such as green bin pricing and materials once they are delivered to their final destination, how they're treated, how they're distributed, and so on. So yeah, building on the deputation from last week, and thank you very much.
Okay, is there, I guess before I look for a seconder on the motion, are there comments from staff on the matter?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe our General Manager of Environmental Infrastructure Services can provide a comment.
There we go. Sorry, technology was slow on me today. Through the mayor, no real comment on the motion itself. Certainly understand the intent of it there. We are limited in our resource availability within our solid waste department, so that is something we'll be cognizant of, but certainly helping them out with information, prices, and providing guidance is something that we are happy to support.
Further questions from council? Councillor Vanden Rishi, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, the cost of the green bins would be absorbed by the individuals, I would take it.
Oh, so through you, Madam Mayor, there is actually no cost at this point in time. There's no financial contribution needed from the county and or the group at this time.
Yeah.
Other questions? So I'm just curious, I guess my question to you, Councillor Martin, my concern is what this means with a dedicated staff person to do this. I don't know that there's anybody, and maybe Andrew, you could stay on the line there. When we say there's no cost and they want a dedicated staff person, that assumes that there's somebody sitting around not doing a job, that they have spare time on their hands. So when anybody else comes to the county and they have questions, our staff endeavor to get those answered. So I don't know why this needs to be a formalized matter, because if it's actually adding portion of a resource, again, assuming that our staff members have a job and they're doing their job and they require their time at work to do that job, then it should be properly a discussion at the time of our budget, because then there's the potential for needing to add an additional resource.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to be fair, they are already meeting with staff, so the motion is presented more so to give staff blessing to continue to do so. They've met with Jason Godby, they've met with Marissa Bokla, they've met with Larry on more than one occasion, Elizabeth, who's there now. So they are continuing to have these meetings when staff has availability for them. Staff is not meeting with them every Monday at 9, or there are no set terms, but they reach out to staff. Staff does follow up to meet with them. There have been Zoom calls, there have been in-person meetings. So these meetings are happening. It's more to give our blessing to staff that they are spending their time and resources on something that we believe in. Firstly, their information is being shared with the consultant on our waste management study through staff. They are diverting 10 tons of waste that we are also not paying for in a landfill right now. So I think dollar for dollar, there is probably some cost savings that works its way out. But at the end of the day, I think it's valuable information for our staff as well to see if there's uptake on a program like this. If the community is interested in it, what potentially that could look like. So it's more just questions and answers on staff's time when they're available to do so with this group.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Roberts, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. I did take note of the deputation that was provided by the group, and I know that they had some asks in there. The dedicated staff member, they did offer to make a contribution of $1,000 towards the bins or towards this project. Many of those asks didn't find their way into the motion, and I would note that in Councillor Martin's motion, it is just asking staff to continue consulting with the Dover Coast Board. There isn't a request for a dedicated staff member in the motion we're considering.
Anything further?
I can comment on the financial aspect. So at this point in time, initially the group was prepared to make an ask of council at budget to consider purchase of green bins. They withdrew that. They don't feel as though they're prepared to come and make an ask at this point in time. So they did want to include their fundraising suggestion of $1,000 in their material, but that's why it's not wrapped in the motion. There is no request at this point.
Van Passen, do I see your hand?
Is this motion actually on the floor? Has it been seconded?
Okay, a second. I just wanted some questions before we got into debate. I had spoken to Al earlier and I knew that staff were going to make some comments. So before we entered into the debate, I wanted to give them the opportunity. So is there a seconder for Councillor Martin's motion? Councillor Michelli. Go ahead, Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now that this motion is on the floor, I'd like to speak to it. I think it's being brought up at the wrong time, wrong way. You don't bring up projects like this in the middle of the year and slap extra costs onto the taxpayer and make budget amendments. It should be transferred as a new budget initiative to the budget discussions that will be done by the new council in January. There's not much point in using this particular area as a pilot program because you have very highly motivated people that have been doing it for a couple of years already. Any of the data you're going to collect from that particular development to extrapolate that countywide to try to figure out the costs of a countywide program would be totally useless because it's not general across the board kind of thing. It's very bunch of very highly motivated, good people trying to do the right thing, but the data will be skewed so much that it won't help us. I think later on in the meeting, we're going to be dealing with projected of next year's tax increase that's above 9%. It's not the time to be starting new programs, I don't think either. So I would put a motion on the floor that this motion be referred back to the budget committee in January of 23 and be dealt with at that time in its entirety. If there's a second for that motion, then we could.
There is already a motion on the floor.
This is a motion to refer it, which takes precedence over the motion on the floor.
Okay, is there a seconder for Councillor Van Passen's motion? I think that's failed, unfortunately, so we will move on with the motion on the floor. Councillor Rabbits, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, speaking in favor of the motion, it is my feeling that bringing a report to the 2023 budget meeting for consideration is the appropriate course of action. I think we've just excluded the language of new budget initiative, but I think that's the spirit and intent of this motion, is to bring it to 2023 with the report with all the information so a decision can be made at that juncture in time. And I'd rather have all that information ready for the budget session for the future term of council than be asking for a report at that juncture in time. So at least we'll get our ducks in a row to have that information. And that's why I'm speaking in favor of this this motion. We could add the new budget initiative. I don't think it would really change the spirit and intent of the motion, but I'll let my colleagues speak to that if they see it differently.
Councillor Van Passen.
Mayor, what information are we going to get? Are we going to go out there and buy boxes, green bins to have all the neighborhood put it in, put them out there, load it up, get the cost of that, get the tonnage? What information is it that we're looking at? Because to do all those things costs money, and where's that money? We would at least need to identify where those extra funding would become, because this becomes a budget amendment. So if somebody could tell me what information that we're going to be gathering there, I'd be glad to know that.
Anything further, Councillor Martin? So I guess if, just before we call the question, then I'm actually not going to support the motion. I support the residents group for doing this. I think it's a fantastic endeavor. I'm glad that our staff are cooperating with them and helping them to answer questions. I do agree with some of what Councillor Van Passen has said, that this should probably be referred to another time. But again, Councillor Martin, I appreciate that you're not asking for any commitment other than to carry on doing what's already kind of going on with staff's cooperation. But I don't see the need for a motion then to formalize something. And I would tend to agree that I'm not sure that this would be reflective of the information that would be useful for our environmental services team in the future to make that assessment. So I'm not going to support it, but I think that I do believe that what they're doing is a great endeavor, and I hope that our staff continue to support them. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to staff report 11.4.1, staff report OPS 22-038 regarding retrofits and EV charging station funding budget amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be brief with my introduction before I turn it over to Michael Simones, the Director of Facilities, and Sydney Clarisey, the Project Lead for Energy and Facility with our Facilities Department. OPS 22038 retrofits and EV charging stations staff report. Staff have been busy applying to grants as both federal and provincial governments are opening up with grant money, and they were successful. As mentioned in the report, most of these items mentioned in the report are projects that are included in the 10-year capital. By staff being successful in the grant applications, it allows the county to move many of these projects forward in the 10-year capital, as well as up to 80% of the cost of the projects will be covered with the funding. So very briefly, I don't want to steal too much of Michael's show here. The retrofits are concerning the Waterford Library. It's one of our most least efficient buildings. The Simcoe Recreation Center is also on the list. It needs work as well as, it's the home pool as our senior center. And the Langton Community Center is on the list for, if council passes this report, for upgrades as well. And it's one of the most popular halls within the west end of the county. Also, there are 7 ERV charging stations, which will be spread out across the county in different arenas and recreational facilities. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael and Sydney, who had worked very hard with our finance staff to fill the application out. And again, we're quite successful in bringing money to the county. Michael.
And thank you, Bill. Through the mayor to the members of council, the intent of this report is to request council approval to amend the approved capital budget in light of federal and provincial funding opportunities that became available to Norfolk County. So there are 3 new initiatives that are presented within this report, including upgrades and retrofits at the Norfolk County Public Library Waterford branch and the Simcoe Recreation Center, and the installation of electric vehicle charging stations at 6 Norfolk County facilities. It should be noted that the proposed upgrades at the Simcoe Recreation Center and the Waterford Public Library, detailed within the staff report, addresses a number of projects identified within the approved 2022 to 2031 capital plan and will result in a total of approximately $54,333 in annual energy savings. Additionally, staff are requesting that the approved capital budget be amended to bring forward the 2024 EV charging station installation project, move forward from 2024 to potentially capture existing generous funding available, while also potentially funding our previously installed charging station at the county administration building. Staff have been researching additional municipal policies and bylaws for EV charging station use, including cost for use, and will ensure these best practices are employed in our project. In addition, as one of the funding streams allows for payments to be applied to previous costs incurred by the county, the already substantially complete Langton Community Center renovations project has been included within this report. Due to stringent project timelines, staff are requesting these amendments to the budget contingent upon funding approval so that projects can commence as soon as possible and be completed within the appropriate time frame. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions of council. Thank you.
Thanks. Any question from council? Councilor Van Der Risch, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is with respect to the 2 EV charging stations we have. And mentioned to me several times that the other parking spots are quite full most of the time. And those 2 EV parking stations we have on the south side of this building aren't totally utilized all the time. Are we monitoring the use of those 2 stations that have been set aside for parking?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Columbus, they are fairly monitored for their use. The intent is that with future EV charging stations, we will have a remote monitoring system available for all our new chargers that we are going to be installing. So that will certainly be incorporated into any future installs. I don't know if that answered it. Captured all of your questions. Sorry, it was a bit choppy on our end. Sorry.
So, Michael, so we are monitoring how often those 2 parking spots are used for parking EV cars.
Perhaps Councillor Columbus, I could pose that a different way. How many times have they been used?
Good way.
Through the chair, that we don't track the number of times, but in terms of the usage, we do have a fairly total usage that's been utilized through the charging stations, and it is fairly high compared to our municipal counterparts in other jurisdictions.
And if someone were to park there that did not have an EV vehicle, would they get charged for that? Or can they park there if they don't have an EV vehicle? It was mentioned to me the other day.
Through the chair, I believe that those parking stalls are currently under the same bylaw as the other parking stalls on Court Street, so they would follow the 2-hour parking limit. Maybe I can defer that question to more of our parking experts on the team.
Michael, Madam Chair. That is a very good question. I know we are going to bring a comprehensive parking bylaw to council, which is basically looked at all of the old parking bylaws and cement them into one. And I will double check unless Teresa, who is my counterpartner in parking, knows that. We'll definitely make sure that they're included under a special bylaw that I believe somewhere along the lines that you have to use the charging station to park, because I don't think we want to see people park there. The purpose is to have the charging station, so they only park to use the station.
Thank you for that. My other question is with respect to the Simcoe Recreation Center, the roof replacement. What is the scope of work for this roof replacement? Is it tar and gravel roof? And what is the scope of work?
Yeah, through the chair, I can certainly answer that question. So the existing roof on the Simcoe Recreation Center is a ModVit roof, so it would be a replacement, but also an insulation enhancement, obviously, to increase the energy efficiency of the building. The idea with that portion of the project is to increase the insulation value while replacing that roof. Obviously, with the roof at its end of expected life, and it surpassed it, and we are taking advantage of that life cycle replacement to do a full enhancement of the building roof system.
So it's interior roof repairs and exterior roof repairs. I take it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Councilor Phelan-Rishi, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. My curiosity is in the funding. When you've made proposals for the funding, this is provincial and federal dollars that we're looking at as well. And could you give me an indication of the amount?
Listed on the
Yeah,
page
I couldn't find it.
249.
Yeah, try to find it.
Each project has a revised budget amount. You will see the federal funding.
Yes, thank you. I just found it. Apologies for these questions. I couldn't find it in the package. Thank you. I found it.
Councilor Van Bassen?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. These are all projects that are already in the capital budget. Federal and provincial governments have set up programs that these projects will be eligible for. And all staff are asking for is to readjust that schedule from things that are projected to be done in 22, 23, 24. If we can get funding from the other levels of government to do them immediately, if we're successful getting the grant. And I don't see what the great issue. I'm sure if they might have to shift some things that are scheduled for this year that we don't have money for to a following year. But I think it's wonderful to have the option, because these type of grants generally have to be spent very quickly because they have to be out the door before the end of the government's fiscal year. So I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation.
Would it be possible for me to ask a couple questions, because there actually wasn't a report on this that caused me more angst than this one, actually. I don't think it's quite as simple as that.
You're going to say, why are we paying for hydro?
Well, that's one of the questions, but if I could.
Yeah. You're the boss. You get to do what you like.
All right. So first question is, have we shelved this idea that I've heard discussed at the library board over the last 3 years of a desire to have a new library in Waterford or a potential partnership with the school? Has that entire idea been shelved? Are we no longer moving forward with that?
Yes, yeah.
Through Madam Mayor to council. Yeah, I officially, I guess I can say I'm not sure. I know there were a lot of talk back a few years ago when we looked at our recreational facilities and concept of a hub. I think with staff, to be honest, we are undergoing a facilities review and just what buildings will be included in that. And buildings won't be included in that, but it's still, I guess, unless the CAO or Michael want to correct me, I think we're a number of years, probably a year or two before we know exactly what buildings will be involved. And then there's a whole process of moving forward with that. We could be a decade before we actually have facilities review. We'll have it together before, but before we can execute all the buildings in it. So kind of tough to, I'm not sure with the library, if they are planning with Waterford to move ahead with the new building. If they are, I'm not aware of that in the very near future.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I commend you guys going and getting the funding. My challenge with this is that has been a hot topic of conversation at the library board over the last 3 years, and a decade out wasn't really the trajectory that I think that they were looking at. This is not me saying I agree or don't agree with, looking at those other options that were being explored. It's just more, again, the bulk of this funding for the library is coming from the federal funding, but there is still a draw from the general building reserve. And I feel that that's a question that staff should be able to answer. Otherwise, just because we're getting federal funding, at the end of the day, it is all one taxpayer. And the idea that we could not be using the building in a couple of years, but we're pouring in close to $500,000 in it, that concerns me without being able to answer what the long-term goal is. And, to your point, Councillor Van Passen, of moving items up, when it was some of these items, the window glazing as an example, wasn't being scheduled until 2029. Well, it gave a few years then to say, are we going to use that building or aren't we going to use that building before that money was potentially wastefully spent? So that's my concern on that one. Then on to the electric vehicle charging stations. I cannot support, I'm hoping that perhaps council can separate out the motion. I remember the day that I showed up at the county office and I saw that the 2 vehicle stations were outside during the height of the pandemic, and I nearly fell over. And I'm just wondering, first of all, you know, council asked a question. It's kind of like I challenged Brandon earlier with the bylaw questions when it says, well, there's been, you know, not many violations. Well, not many isn't really quantifying something, and it's not helping council make a decision. So on this one, I think the words were fairly high usage compared to other municipalities. So what is the usage then? I mean, somebody must have those numbers, and what are the numbers in other municipalities? But fairly high isn't really, you know, giving me confidence.
Yeah, through the chair, we could certainly, I don't have those figures with me at this time, but we could certainly bring back the consumption that we have seen, and that will be what the figures are, is based on the consumption of the chairs, and then we can compare that to yeah, we can provide you with a total usage of the site.
Okay, next question is, what has been the cost to the taxpayers on those units that are there? What was the initial cost of installing those units, and subsequently, how much have Norfolk County taxpayers paid for the hydro on those units for the fairly high consumption?
Through the chair, I believe the total install cost was approximately 10 to 15,000. I believe 15,000 was our budget line. Just to be clear as well, with this grant, 75% of that 15,000 would be funded through this potential grant application. So the net cost to the municipality will be dependent on if this grant is accepted. And in terms of the operating.
Can I stop you there? Because I'm going to come back to those questions. My question was, what is the cost to the taxpayer on not only the units, which you said 10 to 15, I believe it was 15. What is also the cost, the operating cost on those units? So maintenance, any maintenance work that's been done, or what is the average maintenance costs over a trajectory? And what are the operating costs in terms of hydro that the taxpayers of Norfolk are paying for those units? I mean, to me, this is a new budget initiative, so there should be a business case for this. It's not just because we're getting a portion of provincial federal funding that it's an automatic, we should just go and do this. If we're going to do a new budget initiative, there should be a justification for it. So what's the cost to the taxpayer on the 2 units that we've had?
Through the chair, in terms of the maintenance and operating costs, there has been none for the initial year of operation, as they are under warranty currently. So certainly we can provide you with a little bit more of what we expect. We didn't bring that business case to this meeting, but we can certainly follow up to council with the additional information that was presented through the original project.
Okay, so there's not no operating costs. There may have been no maintenance costs, but hydro is an operating cost. So what was the operating cost for those 2 units? If you don't know, that's okay. Just say you don't know, but I think that's an important analysis to have, and what that is actually costing us, because the cost isn't just the cost of installing the units.
And through the chair, we could certainly bring forward, again, that would be very tied in with the usage. Generally speaking, you're looking at a couple dollars essentially per per hour, essentially, of charging. So again, those will be very tied in together.
So, I mean, I look forward to seeing that information, definitely just an email to council, even at that point. But I can't stress, I think it's a new budget initiative. And these things come with a cost, and there's nothing in this report about what the actual long-term costs look like to the taxpayers. And, we do all these programs for social services and so on. We often talk about, how to support people with lower incomes in our community. And at the end of the day, right now, we're asking those people that are in the lowest income bracket, that are being hit with crazy inflation like everyone else, that are struggling to make ends meet, to subsidize the wealthier person who has an electric vehicle to have it charged. So I just, this type of information should be in there. The next question I have is, what research has staff done into other alternatives that are out there besides the municipality fronting a single dollar on this? Because I know that there are companies that actually go and install these machines at no cost to the taxpayer, either at a municipal level or at a provincial or federal level. They install them, and there's a spot for your credit card, and you pay your couple bucks to charge your car. Why are the taxpayers here subsidizing somebody that has an electric vehicle when they still have to pay to put gas in their car? So have we as staff looked at other options that are out there that wouldn't cost the taxpayers of Norfolk County either a single dollar for the purchase of the equipment or a single dollar to operate the equipment? Have we looked at any of those options? Because I know of some of the companies that are out there.
To the mayor, I have personally reached out to a few companies. A lot of their interests are at private companies. We've seen a lot of municipalities implement charging stations on their own at their community centers, arenas, trails, and parks. I mean, if this is something that, you might rather us bring back in August, where we can do a little bit more research and reach out to some more companies for you, we could certainly do that. But yeah.
For myself, I would like to see, again, I'd like to see the motion split so you can move ahead with the other options. And then separating this out, I can tell you that I'm aware that the individuals that purchased the Langton Administration Building, in fact, they have a business as well tied to doing exactly this, electric vehicle charging stations that they install at no cost. Then I guess my final question, and it was brought up here a couple minutes ago, is in regards to the funding for the stations that already exist. So the way that I just heard it was that this funding would go towards that 15,000 that the taxpayers shelled out for the 2 electric vehicle stations that we have currently. But in the report, what I understood was you were still going to attempt to apply for that. So which is it? Is it?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Is it part of this funding is going to go and cover those stations that we already have, or we are applying for it and we're hoping that they might cover it?
To the mayor, the one that was previously installed is included in this funding.
So why did we not apply for this initially with?
To the mayor, sorry, this funding stream was not available at the time. And I know that we did apply to a different funding stream for it, which we were not successful.
If I could ask you a question, in your experience, have you seen municipalities go and install these at a full cost, 100% to the taxpayer?
For you, Madam Mayor, I would say the following. It's atypical, but it would depend on council's priorities. If council's identified climate action and trying to change some behaviors and different things, some councils will front end the costs, but there are a multitude of programs out there, and the majority of municipalities look for grant opportunities and try to move forward with a cost sharing agreement through all of these other grants that are available out there.
But it's atypical that a municipality would bear the 100% of the cost of a project like this. And given that we're in a pretty rural community, I think, it's interesting that we moved forward with absolutely no provincial or federal funding at the time. So if there's no further questions from council, Councilor Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just maybe to Michael and Sydney. I'm wondering if it is possible that we could use a publicly funded charging station, because one of the goals, I believe, in the report is to encourage tourism. Is that one of the reasons why we're kind of suggesting that? Is that, maybe we will get more people to use electric vehicles if they are attracted to it, or at least people will arrive in Norfolk County in an electric vehicle because they perhaps know that there is no charge for doing it when they get here. Is that part of the rationale?
Through the chair, certainly that is one of the biggest draws, or one of the biggest rationales behind the project initially was the tourism dollars that it would encourage electric vehicle owners to, and it's quite known throughout the EV charging community or EV vehicle community that EV owners will certainly seek charging stations and will plan their trips and their routes based on the locations of those charging stations, and that was one of the rationales why we selected downtown Simcoe as the initial pilot for that project.
Councillor Huffman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to staff. What kind of comms has been done in terms of letting people know that these charging stations are available?
Through the chair, we did do an initial communications blitz when they were first installed. Certainly, we could explore continuing that message out there, but there are public websites that we have made aware that these charging stations are there, and there are maps available to EV vehicle owners across the country through that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I think this is a coming thing. You would see it in many cities. We see it in London, all over. At the end of the day, are we able, even though we get funding, to be able to put a charge on those chargers? Can we have it that we have them there and then put a charge of $2 an hour or whatever?
Councillor Van Riesche, I'm going to turn that over to Al. We had this discussion earlier today before the meeting, so I'll let Al answer that question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would say the following. The strategy before you is really to set up the infrastructure for EV charging stations across the county. I think it's something that we're severely behind other communities in having that infrastructure ready, and if it results in additional tourists, great. If it starts to change the behaviors and it makes them more attractive, great. We're at least contributing to the issue of climate change. In terms of actually charging for stations, for the charging, I would say the following. When these first came out, municipalities were not allowed to charge for charging for electricity because you had to be an electricity distributor and you had to get licensed from the province in order to be able to sell electricity, because that's in essence what you're doing. Legislation, I understand, is starting to change and is starting to become a little more flexible in that. So in my opinion, the vision would be, once we're fully built out, once we've got all of these charging stations across the county, do I foresee a day where these can become a revenue generator? Absolutely. I think there's going to be a time where eventually, whether it's in our generation or the next one, electrical vehicles will be the norm, and instead of stopping off at a gas station, you'll be charging your vehicles at these electric vehicle charging stations across wherever you're driving. You'll put in your credit card or your debit card, and you'll be paying for the $2 or $5 to rapidly boost your car and get on. So long story short, there is an opportunity over the long term to start charging it, fee for it, and start recouping our costs. We're not there yet as a community, but we will be there eventually.
Sorry, Al, if I could just follow up with that. What are our costs?
I think you heard staff say
Again,
they're
there's
gonna
a
come
new
back with
budget
that.
initiative that's on the table and nobody can answer what the costs are, Councillor Van Riesche.
But can I, just so for the mayor, just so everyone's aware, we can budget a cost. We know that it'll cost about $2 for a vehicle to charge. we can estimate if there's 10 cars a day that it'll actually charge. You can do the math and we can do it that way. Are we proactively monitoring it? No. Anecdotally, I can tell you looking out my window, it's used. We look out and, you know, staff are often looking out and seeing how often it's used. Is it actively used? No. Are there people there every day? For sure. But part of the challenge, and I think you brought that up, Councillor Columbus, is you want to be able to have those spots turn over on a regular basis. You don't want someone parked there for the day and plugged in. So part of that challenge, and it's not unique to Norfolk County, and this is other municipalities that I've been at, is how do you encourage that behavior so someone comes in, plugs in for an hour, and then goes and gives someone else an opportunity. At other employers where I've been employed, where we had that, staff that had electric vehicles would be parked there throughout the day, and we started to have issues. So part of the challenge is part of that behavior is how do you get people to move, plug in, charge, and get out and let someone else in. So this is all part of a process and evolution. And I think part of what staff's put in front of you is starting to put that infrastructure in place so that we can evolve, and eventually we'll get it so that we'll be monitoring it, we'll be able to charge it, we'll know exactly what our cost recovery will be, and eventually we'll likely be able to make some dollars off of this as well.
Keep going. Thank you. In my opinion, I think we have to be proactive. I mean, climate change is here. We all know it, let alone just by the temperature. But at the end of the day, I don't want to lose the funding envelope that's coming with this. And I think it's important that we do it within the timelines that are made available. My question is there a timeline that we could lose this opportunity? And I fully understand it's one taxpayer, but at the end of the day, if we don't take the opportunity, somebody else does, because both levels of government have only so much in their envelopes to give out.
Through the mayor to Councillor Van Andriesche. Yeah, so this particular project would have to be completed by March 31st, 2023. And obviously it could get a little bit difficult to dig underground to install the infrastructure, the cable itself in the winter months. So that's why we did bring this report forward to council today.
So would there be enough time for the August meeting to get some of that additional information? Like, is there a company out there that would be able to do this without and support this whole development? I support the idea. I just don't support it costing the taxpayers money. A company that would be out there that would be willing to do this without costing the taxpayers a single dollar. And that should be information you would be able to bring that back for August the 11th.
Yeah, to the mayor, I think that would be feasible. You know, we can still get appropriate documentation ready before that meeting and see and do more research and bring more of that information forward to you. I do think the timeline could be feasible. That's what council would like.
Councilor Van Passen, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just question, I don't, this quite could be classified as a new budget initiative. It has been discussed, brought forward by the Energy Conservation Committee and by the Climate Adaptation Committee. I think the ones that were installed here, they got kicked out of the budget for 2 years and they finally got installed in last year's budget. So it has been on the books, and I don't think that we're doing something that we shouldn't be, but I think you're absolutely correct that, you know, why are we in the business of that? If there's private businesses out there that can provide that service, why would the municipality do it to lose money on? Because I do believe somebody told me, I thought it was $3.70 a charge. So maybe we should just put the paid parking in these two spots at $5 an hour. So you park there, we're going to collect $5 to park there because we can't charge you for the hydro, and you will at least get your money back on that. So. But I don't believe this is a new budget initiative, but if we could delay it, I'd be happy to withdraw that one from the staff recommendation, because I do believe I moved this motion a little while ago. So if we could withdraw that one and bring it back in August, that would be fine.
Okay, so if you're moving that, then Councillor Van Andriesche, or sorry, I thought you were looking kind of a seconder for that. So that would be the balance of the motion with the exception of the EV charging station, which we referred back to staff for the August meeting. Seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Folks, to cover off the electrical charge going forward. So it's kind of ironic we're talking about that now, but it's very similar to what we did with the dog park. When we put that in, we knew there were additional costs as far as garbage bags and staff time to clean up. So I believe in that when we threw in an operating cost of $800 increase a year in our operating budget for that, as well as a recent project that isn't in yet, but through a residents group in Delhi, we're going to raise $9,000 for an $18,000 upgrade of Quant's Dam. And again, staff have put in $500 a year for additional, some grass cutting, some lawn maintenance, and basically garbage pickup. So staff are asking for future operating budgets will be increased by $300 to cover off the hydro. And I guess with that, if any of the BIA folks are listening, I'd like to thank them for their time and their efforts and coming forward with putting, the word, having an idea, working with staff, and then bringing it forward to Norfolk County at basically zero cost to upgrade the park, which I think once the park is upgraded will be utilized much more. So good news story, I think. But with that, I'll turn it over to county councilors for any questions they may have.
Any questions from council? It is a great news story. Again, something coming forward with no cost to the taxpayer. So Councillor Columbus, I'll turn it over to you and I'll let you move the motion if you like.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yes, this project's been talked about at the BIA table regularly, as I'm a representative of council on that committee, on that board. And just to say that this electricity is very badly needed there. Hard to function with, put any functions on without hydro there, especially in the evening, as we know. Remembrance Day comes along, we have to beg for hydroelectricity to run speaker systems and that when there's 200 and some people there. So this is long overdue, and I would move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Staff report CS 22-123 regarding the 2021 year-end update is next.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. The purpose of this memo is to introduce the bylaw to appoint Millard's Chartered Professional Accountants in accordance with the Municipal Act now that the procurement process has been approved and completed with the executed contract, along with providing a high-level unaudited overview of the 2021 operating results. The final audited financial statements will be presented by the auditor at the September Council and Committee meeting. And with that, I'm pleased to pass it over to Amy Fanning, the county's Deputy Treasurer, to provide an overview of the memo details.
Okay, here we go. All right, thank you, Shelley. Through the mayor to council, as Shelley said, the intent of this memo is to provide council with an update on the timing of the year-end audit for 2021, which will be somewhat later than usual. In addition, we wanted to provide council with the unaudited results for 2021 and some explanations as to the surplus drivers. It is important to note that the results are unaudited at this time and are possibly subject to change during the course of the audit, which will take place in August. Final results will be brought back to council in September, along with recommendations for disbursement of the surplus funds to county reserve funds. As part of the year-end processes, staff have completed 233 working papers and detailed analysis of all the balance sheet accounts, along with master working paper files for all of our trust accounts and all of our reserve funds. Reports have been saved and all the original documentation has been collected as applicable for the audit backup. And finally, staff have prepared draft statements and finalized the FIR in preparation for the audit to begin. I also wanted to highlight for council the impacts from COVID-19 and the surplus in salaries and benefits are anticipated to be one-time in nature, and these are not expected to continue into the current year. With those impacts removed, the 2021 year-end draft results approximately a 4% surplus, and that's within a reasonable range for a municipality like ourselves that doesn't have significant reserves to fall back on. Staff are pleased to present bylaw 2022-60 to council this evening to appoint Millards as the county's auditor for the financial years of 2021 through 2025. If there are any questions of council, my colleagues and I would be pleased to answer them.
Questions for Ms. Fanning? Councillor Banderici, go ahead.
Just a curiosity question. Millard's been the accountant for many, many years. Is that put out for tender every year?
Through the mayor to Councillor Banderici, the Municipal Act recommends that an auditor be appointed for a term not exceeding 5 years. So past practice here has always been a 5-year term.
Thank you.
Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you through you. My question is about operations and our reduced winter maintenance schedule. We've had some favorable conditions these last couple of seasons, resulting in surpluses. And I was just wondering what staff's perspective is, since we had a service level reduction, I believe, to the Ontario, the minimum regulation. And I was wondering if we are generating surpluses, during fair weather, if staff are satisfied with the level of maintenance, or if there is an opportunity to increase those service levels, thereby reducing that surplus. I was just wondering if staff have considered that and what their thoughts are. It is a new direction that this term of council implemented.
Through the chair to Councillor Rabbits, I'll take that question. So we have not explored that avenue with the operations group. However, just an intro into the report I will be presenting next, and Councillor Van Passen gave you a little bit of an intro. My recommendation would be to utilize some of those savings and those favorable variances we've had over the last couple of years to reduce our budget cost increases next year. So that is my response from a financial perspective.
Any further questions? Councilor Van Passen.
Just a couple of follow-up questions. We did tender for new auditors this year, and actually the recommendation was for a different firm that backed out, and we took the second choice, which is our old one. Is that correct? And I'll throw out the other follow-up question. Roughly, what is the cost of one good snowstorm in the winter? Maybe Mr. Cridlin knows
I
that.
think Bill might have come in just back in time to answer that one.
Through the chair, I think the question as I sat down was, I don't know the context, but what a basically storm, one winter.
We had a surplus of 1.9 million in the winter control, but if I remember correctly, that's about 2 good storms.
Through the chair to the councillor, I might argue it's a little closer to 4, but it's very expensive when you're full blown with 20 contractors, 50 in-house staff, plus salt at over $100 a ton to salt the brine. It adds up very quickly. Yeah, and afterwards, you're correct.
Further questions from council? Okay, with that then, if somebody can move the staff recommendation, Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Huffman, all those in favor? That's carried. And I know finance staff just got up here, but if we could take a 10-minute break, that would be greatly appreciated. So we'll see you back at 5 minutes after 3. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to move on to our next staff report, which is 11.5.2, Staff Report CS 22-121 regarding the budget timetable and preliminary budget projection. Shelley, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. The purpose of this report is to present the 2023 budget timetable and provide an initial assessment of preliminary budget projections for the levy-supported and rate-supported 2023 budget. Though improvements in the county's financial position have been made over the last 3 years, the county continues to be in a position where additional steps are required. The largest challenges will continue to be our asset management needs, our infrastructure needs, and replenishing our reserves, all of which will contribute to budget drivers in 2023, along with significantly higher than normal inflationary increases. With that, I'm pleased to welcome Chris Everett, the County Supervisor of Financial Planning and Reporting, and Catherine Fanning, the County's Manager of Strategic Financial Planning and Reporting. And they'll provide an overview of the report this afternoon.
Thank you, Shelley. Good afternoon, Mayor Chop and the members of council. So I appreciate this time to provide you some of the highlights of the report. Internally, staff have initiated preparation for the 2023 budgets. We have a number of dates planned for the presentation and adoption of the budgets, which include the 2023 capital budget and 10-year plan, which is planned to be presented to the Budget Committee on September the 20th. We've got a full jam-packed meeting on November the 17th planned with the Budget Committee to review a number of things, including agencies, boards, and commission budget requests, user fees, preliminary presentations for new budget initiatives or service level changes related to the levy-supported operating budget, as well as the rate-supported operating budget. We also have planned the levy-supported operating budget deliberations for January 9th, 18th and 19th in 2023. Financial management and planning have also worked on providing some very preliminary budget projections based on known internal and external pressures. At a high level, even though improvements of the county's financial position have been made over the last few years, as Shelley noted, we're still in a position where we need to take some steps. Shelley also noted our asset management strategy and reserves pressures that continue to be some of our largest financial pressures. And now we're coupling that with higher than regular inflationary pressures. So similar to many households, the county has started to feel the pressures related to those pressures. So year over year, we're at about 7.7% for CPI inflationary. So that's just general goods. So some services have seen higher pressures and other services have experienced lower pressures. So our projections that I'm going to talk about are going to continue to be refined through our budget process, and things could increase or decrease as more detailed analysis is completed and as the budget process continues. So this isn't a good news presentation today. I wasn't looking forward to presenting this report. But I just want to note that SLT and staff are really going to be working towards efforts on mitigating some of the impacts that we're talking about. So this is just high level analysis. So let's first talk about the capital budget. So our inflationary pressures that I mentioned are going to impact our capital plan over the next 10 years. Based on high level projections, this will increase our budget by at least 33 million, which equates to 5% as compared to the project values from 2022's capital plan presentation. So that's before we're looking at any project changes specifically. These impacts will obviously impact our asset management plan and will have significant pressures on both of our operating budgets due to reserve contributions, as well as debt pressures that we will experience as a result. For our rate-supported operating budget, we have some good news here. So we have seen higher increases in the water and wastewater customers as compared to the anticipated level during the rate study. So it is anticipated this will help mitigate some of the higher than anticipated inflationary pressures. So right now we're projecting the rates will increase at about 5.3% based on the 10-year plan that was adopted by council during the last rate study. Though we are looking at some service level changes for the rate supported operating budget, we haven't brought any forward over the last number of years. So the senior leadership team is currently discussing some preliminary service level items that might come forward for recommendation to the budget committee. But at a high level, some of these impacts could result in additional rate increases of approximately 3%, just based on our early estimates. Now let's talk about our levy supported operating budget, or the taxation budget. So based on our preliminary high level analysis, we're projecting a 9.5% increase to the net levy and an increase of about 9% to the average residential taxpayer when we're considering the assessment growth. So our main challenges include inflation that has been much higher than we were expecting or typical, as well infrastructure funding, like we've talked about, and debt payments. We also are anticipating some changes to the OMERS pension plan that will have an impact on the 2023 budget. They're changing some eligibility requirements, so we'll bring some more information about that forward as the time comes. Basically, some more people can elect to be involved in the OMERS pension plan than can right now, so that would result in additional impacts to our salary and benefit line budgets. Our assessment growth generated through property development and improvements, that creates the additional revenue, and it will offset some of our property tax increase, like I noted at the beginning. Our early indications suggest the growth for 2023 is higher than that we experienced in the budget in 2022, which is the good news. However, we're really hoping that forecast will pick up by the time we present the budget. The county also continues to experience significant pressure on existing services and demands for new and enhanced services based on growth, changing legislation, and historical service delivery pressure points that are coming to a head. So right now, the senior leadership team has kind of started looking toward a long-term plan and how we're going to address these. And so we'll start bringing those forward in November for the budget committee's review with final adoption planned for January. So in summary, our early projections for the budget have increased for the levy as well as the capital from those expected in the 2022 budget deliberations. Right now, if we don't move forward with any of our service level adjustments for rate, we will be right around where we thought we would be during last year's budget for 2023 for the rate budget. So my colleague, Amy Fanning, just presented our surplus report for 2021. So a common question people ask after presenting or experiencing a surplus is, why would we expect taxes to increase after we had a surplus? So I know Amy did mention that a number of the items that caused our surplus are one-time in nature, and so we're not expecting them to happen again. But we are expecting there to be some reductions and favorable reductions to the budget to offset some of our higher than inflationary increases. So the last thing I want to draw council's attention to is changes to the budget process for 2023. Just at a high level, we're recommending things to proceed very similar to the 2022 budget. But we're looking at making a few refinements. So for our public consultation, we're always looking for ways to enhance this process, working in conjunction with our communications team. So we've decided we think it would be best to lengthen the time that respondents can respond on our survey, as well as we're looking into other avenues for people to be able to respond to the survey other than just online. We also are excited to use the county's online engagement platform for more flexibility for residents to engage in our budget process. And also we are looking at reevaluating our current online engagement sessions that were kind of staff presentation and then had some open dialogue with residents and also community groups, as we did not have significant attendance from the public in the past. So we're just looking at how we can make that process better. We're also looking at our participatory budgeting. So I believe this council will remember we've talked about looking at establishing a participatory budgeting where we get more residents involved in making budget decisions. Staff have started some research on this process. And really what we're hoping is that during the 2023 budget process, we can get some feedback from residents. We've included some sample survey questions in the attachment where we're going to ask specific questions on participatory budgeting. So we can really make sure that the process would be tailored to Norfolk resident needs and as well the council. So after the election, we're expecting to start working with the new council on this initiative as well. So thank you for allowing me the time to start our budget conversations early, even though it's not the happiest presentation today. So.
Questions from council? No comments, no questions? Councilor Van Bassen.
Same comment I think I made before. Again, we have a respectable surplus, but I think the majority of that comes from the fact that the province did send out a lot of extra funding from COVID, and our staff were proactive and made cuts and saved money, not knowing whether we were going to get it or not. And the fact that we got it is the reason that most of that surplus is there. So, you know, our staff did a good job. This was not some little shell game of trying to hide money. It was the fact that we got grants from the province and the feds that we were not counting on at the beginning of the year, and we did a good job managing our funds, and now we have a little bit left over to jingle in our pocket to put where it needs to be. Thank you.
I would only correct that by saying not you think, that is the reason. So good job to staff. Further questions, comments from council? Well, I guess I have a few. So when we talk about, Catherine, you mentioned service level changes and staff haven't brought any changes forward in the last couple of years. I have to commend staff for that as well, as we've been trying to get things in line. And I know new budget initiatives and more FTEs and let's do this and let's do that. It seems to always be the spirit of past budgets. But staff did a really good job the last few years, and they knew not to bring anything new forward while we were making cuts. So when we talk about new budget initiatives this year, when we're seeing the highest inflation that we've seen in almost 3 decades, I'm not really sure why that's a consideration this year either. What types of new budget initiatives can we be looking at coming forward?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Mayor Chop, and maybe I'll pass things over to our CAO to speak a little bit about that.
Through you, Madam Mayor. As Catherine said, this is all a very preliminary budget at this time, but there are pressures that we're feeling. Some of them related to our planning and development areas. I think all of you are inundated with calls in regards to the process that we're following, the timelines, things of that sort. So we are actively looking at some of these areas. You've got some legislative changes in that area, as well as 109 is going to put some pressures on our municipality to address some of these applications in a timely manner that we are currently not addressing as quickly as we would like to and as quickly as the applicants would like us to. So within sort of that narrative, as senior management, we're looking at all of those current pressures that staff are feeling. We're looking at opportunities for refinement to our processes in an attempt to streamline. And if we're not successful in being able to address some of those pressures and concerns, you may see some NBIs come forward for consideration in 2023.
So I guess my comments on the planning side of things, before we look at raising taxes, I mean, I'm not saying we don't need additional staff, but I see, you know, applications, holdups over grading plans for planning applications that has been the same grading for the last 30 years. Why is there even a request for these types of things? I think that more than raising taxes, the initial assessment should be, how can we eliminate some of that waste? When we look at planning applications, we're also, you know, this delay, every time we delay a project coming forward, it means that we are not getting that assessment growth that much sooner. So in reality, planning applications, we charge user fees, which is supposed to be a pay for service. So it really shouldn't have an impact on the county, given that we are collecting these fees from people. And if we can get these projects online sooner, we should actually be bringing in that revenue that much sooner to further alleviate those pressures. So I guess, you know, and I know I heard earlier, and Councillor Van Passen, I'll agree with you on the new budget initiatives with the EV project, in the sense of, is it really an NBI, given that we had approved the other two? I can go with that, but at the same time, before you go and add 6 more, you know, when we look at these new budget initiatives, you should be going and evaluating the services that you have, and is it worthwhile before we move forward to add more, when we've got a case study right here just outside the front door. I cannot support, you know, this idea that we're going to go in a year where people are being hit harder than ever in every aspect of their lives, and look at adding, you know, new budget initiatives and a 9% increase. I understand, I've talked to some other municipalities, you know, insurance pressures are being faced by everyone right now. That's a given. We know inflationary pressures through supplies, that's a given. We know through our union contracts, et cetera, that we have increases that we are going to see there that we can't get away from. There certainly are increases that, you know, all municipalities are very concerned moving into this coming budget. That's a fact. It's not just Norfolk County, it's everywhere, because those same pressures are hitting them. But to say that we're going to then go and start looking at other NBIs and putting money out the door on, and I'm sorry, you know, whether it's, you know, a green bin program or electrical vehicle charging stations, again, when it's the highest inflation we've seen in 3 decades, I don't think that this is the year to be looking at those kind of items. But that's just my 2 cents as we move into the budget process. Any other questions from council? Councilor Van Den Riche, go ahead.
Just one comment. I think with all these pressures, and I do appreciate them, but at the end of the day, this county has to be proactive, because the more we are enhanced, the more people come to this county, and that will add a lot of tax dollars to our coffers. So I think it's very important to go through the process, but I really think it's important to also be proactive in what we can do to make this county stand out. But I do want to commend the staff for all the hard work you've done. Thank you.
Further questions from council, comments? Okay, with that, then if I could have a mover for the staff recommendation. Councilor Michelle, seconded by Councilor Rabbits. All those in favor? And that's carried. All right, we are going to move on to the approval of the bylaws, and I can see Teresa looking at me from the corner of her eye. So I'm going to need, first of all, is there any member of council that wishes to speak to any of the bylaws? Okay, so I will need a mover and a seconder to approve the following bylaws. Bylaw 2021-166, 18 Zulu 2022, 21 Zulu 2022 to 24 Zulu 2022 inclusive, 4 OP 2022, 6 OP 2022, 1 SP 2022, 2022-52, 2022-53, and 2022-60 to 2022-64, with the note that for bylaw 24 Zulu 2022, that would be approved as amended with a change in clause 2DA number 3 from 1.0 to 1.25. That was in regards to the parking. So if I could have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Van Den Riche. All those in favor? That is carried. Okay, we've already dealt with the motion from Councillor Martin. So in that case, we'll move on to general announcements before moving into closed session for today. Are there any general announcements from council? Councillor Columbus, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did pass this photo around earlier before the meeting started. It's Norfolk County Council, 1928. It was provided to me by a lady who runs a business in Delhi. She found it while they were renovating. Just some, I note here, they're all men. And there's only 3 people wearing glasses in the whole photo, probably about a couple dozen counselors back then that represented all of Norfolk County. So quite a contrast to what we have today, 8 counselors and the mayor. And here we've got all these that were formerly represented all of Norfolk, which included the other part of Townsend and Council Martin area. So I would like to just pass this on to the CEO and he can provide it to wherever it can have a good home. I would take it, it'd probably be the Eva Brook Donnelly Museum, the archives thing. If they don't have it already, they may have it because all these people, I would imagine, got a photograph at that time. So they may have it. But just a little bit of tidbit of good information.
That's awesome. Thanks very much for bringing that. Anything further from Council Vanden Rishi?
Yes, I'd like to commend our hockey players that are out there. The under 17 camp was held out in Calgary this year. There was only 100 players of Canada that came out, and we have one Merrick Vanacker, who is in the under 17 camp, and I'd like to commend him and his family. Just a product of Norfolk and highly commendable on his part as well.
Councillor Vanden Rishi, further announcements? Okay, seeing none then, if I could have a motion for council to enter into closed session at 3:28 p.m. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Columbus. All those in favor, sorry, and I didn't finish reading all that out. Of course, that's in regards to 16.1 employee matters, which is a verbal update, and 16.2, which is Award 3 proposed property acquisition. And that would be pursuant to sections 239 B, C, and D of the Municipal Act 2001, as amended, as the subject matter pertains to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, and labor relations or employee negotiations. So with that, we'll enter into close. Councillor Columbus.
Just a point of clarification. I believe that should be Ward 4 and not Ward 3.
Nope, my apologies. Okay.
I know that's the way it's printed.
It was, you're correct. Thank you for the correction. Okay, thanks everyone.
Hi, it's Mayor Chop. Hi, it's Mayor Chop. Hi, it's Mayor Chop. Just finished touring the Delhi Tobacco Museum for a trip around the world. I would encourage anyone to come out today. We're headed off to the library and Strawberry Fest next, and then to other events across Norfolk County. So we really hope to see you out there across the county today. Like lovers do. Hi, it's Mayor Chop. Just finished touring the Delhi Tobacco Museum for a trip around the world. I would encourage anyone to come out today. We're headed off to the library and Strawberry Fest next, and then to other events across Norfolk County. So we really hope to see you out there across the county today. Just finished touring the Delhi Tobacco Museum for a trip around the world. I would encourage anyone to come out today. We're headed off to the library and Strawberry Fest next, and then to other events across Norfolk County. So we really hope to see you out there across the county today.
like lovers do.
That's carried. And finally, a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Huffman, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favor? That's carried. Have a great night, everyone.